You are live.
In the absence of Chair Morales, I'll be chairing tonight's meeting. I'll now call the Finance and Corporate Services Committee meeting to order. It's 6:04 p.m. Welcome everyone to our virtual meeting. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, physical distancing measures, the Finance and Corporate Services Committee is meeting virtually. Members of the committee, executive management, and the city clerk are participating via video conference, and the senior leadership team are not visible but are available to answer questions related to the items on the agenda. We have no open delegations this evening. However, we do have a few presentations. First, I'd like to call upon the presentation concerning the Stormwater Climate Action Fund. I would like to now call upon Evan Chen, the Stormwater Climate Action Fund Project Manager, and Nancy Hill from ACOM to provide the presentation.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Councillor Harvey. And I too had to snowball my driveway to get out of my house this evening and get my daughter to a dance class. I think they're slowly opening that back up, so on limited capacity. So it's good to hear. Give me a second here, let me get organized, and then I will share my screen. All right, everybody can see that. I think I see some nodding heads, so I think
we don't have it up.
Actually, your screen hasn't shared yet.
Not yet? All right, let me try it again. Hold on. How about now?
Nope.
And now.
There you go.
Awesome. All right, here we go. So again, thank you very much. And before we get too far into the presentation today, I just want to say a quick thank you for letting us borrow a bit of your time tonight to talk about the Stormwater Climate Action Fund project, which I find very exciting. I also want to quickly introduce a couple of our team members. As you've already heard, Nancy Hill, our ACOM project director, is part of our consultant. She's going to be joining us today. And then from the city of Barrie, I also have Tom Reeve, senior asset management plan coordinator, and Jacob Reed, supervisor of technical stormwater and rail operations. They'll be helping me answer some questions near the end of the presentation. All right, so what we have on the agenda today is I'll briefly go over the staff report recommendations and a quick review of our program objectives. And then I will provide a quick update about the public engagement activities that the project team had completed back in 2021. Before we get into more technical side of things with the program details, and of course, we'll close off this presentation with a question and answers period if you do have any. All right, any questions about the agenda? Pretty straightforward. Perfect. Sounds good. All right. So for part of the staff report recommendations, our first recommendation is Stormwater Climate Action Fund to be implemented in 2023, with the rates being approved as part of the 2023 budget process at the existing service level standards. So I'll get into a little bit more information about what I mean by existing service level standards when we talk about the funding. The second thing we're looking for is the adoption of the SWCAF corporate policies that's outlined in Appendix A and B of the staff report. So that's the corporate policies for the program itself, as well as the credit program. And then we're also looking for approval to complete the next phase of the project, which means updating our existing water and wastewater billing software, as well as building out the additional processes and engaging with our software vendors. And then last but not least, the hiring of 2 positions for the implementation and sustainment of the Stormwater Climate Action Fund. And these positions include 1 dedicated program coordinator and 1 dedicated financial billing analyst. So like I mentioned, I'd like to quickly review what we like to call the 3 pillars or the program objectives. The first pillar is really the protection of Lake Simcoe. So stormwater adds pollutants to Lake Simcoe, and with the better stormwater management means that we will have better water quality. At the same time, we like to increase the state's resiliency against the impacts of climate change, and by managing urban runoff, by safely controlling and conveying flows, as well as providing water quality treatment. And then last but not least, our last pillar is really to be more fair and equitable in terms of shifting funding from a property tax-based principle to a user fee principle, where the stormwater management costs are shifted to the heaviest contributors based on impervious areas. So I'll explain a little bit more about that later on in the presentation as well. But so some of you who may have heard the presentation before, you may recall impervious area is really just a hard surface such as parking lots, driveways, and rooftops. So in terms of public engagement, last year, the project team completed 2 advisory group meetings, one earlier in the year on May 5th, and a second one later on in the year in September. Now, what this advisory group is, it's consists of members from the community, and they have representation from neighborhood associations, from nonprofits, from conservation authorities, and even a couple of commercial property owners. And really what this group is meant to do is act as a sounding board for a project team to talk about the project, get their feedback based on their industry and based on their experience within that industry, and how to engage various public and how to share the information about the project out to the public. On top of that, we also completed 2 public engagement sessions, one on June, and then another one in October as well. Now, those public engagement sessions was with the public, so we do have those presentations recorded and available on buildingberry.ca. So if any of you feel like to learn more about stormwater and Stormwater Climate Action Fund, and you have some spare time, feel free to peruse over to buildingberry.ca and take a look at those presentations. There's lots of good information in there, even more so than what's in here as well. So as part of our public engagement, after each of those sessions, we did send out a survey to all the various participants. I'm not going to go through each of these, but I will quickly highlight a few of the survey results. And mainly one, majority of the participants agree that the stormwater cost should be equitably distributed across the community. And also vast majority do agree that the recommended stormwater user fee should be based on impervious area. So again, that user fee principle. And again, 84%, which is quite a few, do agree that we need to have some kind of credit or rebate program to incentivize property owners to have some kind of stormwater management facility on their properties and to gain credit for that within this stormwater fee. So in addition to the survey, we also received back comments and questions during the presentation, during the public engagement sessions, but as well as even after those sessions, we did get phone calls, emails from the public, and we really summarized them and grouped them under these 4 broad categories. The first category and the feedback that I received was that to increase education of the impacts of impervious areas for new developments and the importance of green development standards. The second one, a lot of the participants did mention the environmental protection for Lake Simcoe, which we found was really important because it did line up with what we consider as one of our pillars and our program objectives. So it's great to see that coming back from the public engagement and the participants there as well. The third one is the city should lead by example to modify its own properties. And last but not least, of course, again, it's in regards to the credit program and to have something in place to incentivize property owners. So now we're going to get into a bit more technical. So we're going to talk a little bit about current funding models and how that changes from the previous, which are current funding model to our impervious area funding models. So as you can see with the current tax-led revenue contributions, you can see that non-residential property owners contribute 25%, whereas residential property owners contribute 75% via the property taxes towards stormwater. Now you can see if we shift towards impervious area, now the non-residential property owners now contribute 46%, and residential property owners now contribute 54%. Now the shift, of course, is because more commercial properties or non-residential properties usually have a lot more impervious areas, such as parking lots, rooftops, things of that nature. So you can see why it's a shift from a tax to impervious area. That's why you see that shift between the 2 different types. At the same time, I'm going to talk a little bit about the funding level needs. So when I spoke about earlier about the staff report recommendation to have it at the existing service level standards, which is where we are here now at the 10 million mark. And as you may recall, earlier in 2021, we did have a stormwater asset management plan that was presented and approved by council, where it was outlined that we actually needed to be around here at 45 million. But for the purpose of this initial program, we're really only looking at the existing service level standards. So we're looking at the $10 million here. And to even contextualize the stormwater user fee a little bit more, I'll provide a little bit more information from other municipalities that have some variation of the stormwater user fee. So across Ontario, there's about 16 municipalities. And within those municipalities, you'll notice that the range is actually fairly large, but on average is about $9.34. So it ranges from $3 all the way up to $17.13. Again, that the fee amount is really dependent on what the municipality needs are, and they would charge the fees accordingly based on that. All right, so now we're going to get more technical. So now we're looking at the model recommendation. So I'll try to explain this as best as I can and as simply as I can, because I know it could get a little bit confusing because we're not talking about ratios, rates, dollars, and a bunch of math involved with it. But really, what we're recommending is that residential properties pay based on an average impervious area by property type. So you can imagine a detached residential unit seen in this picture. In Barrie, they have an average impervious area of about 236 square meters. So that would be considered our baseline unit. So our baseline DRU unit, so detached residential unit for billing purposes. So something like a townhome, they may have a similar impervious area. However, they now split into 2 units and so on with the triplex, duplex, so on and so forth. So I'll get into examples like that in the next slide. So I'll provide more information. But just remember that we're really looking at the detached residential unit as our baseline of average impervious area. In terms of the non-residential properties, they pay based on actual impervious area. So what we mean by actual is that measured impervious area based on areas. And again, we will relate that back towards the what's the equivalent number of resident properties impervious area did that take. So for example, if you had a large commercial property and based on a measured impervious area, it turned out to be equivalent of about 16, let's say, detached residential units impervious areas, and then that's what the fee would be charged accordingly. But again, I will contextualize this a little bit more in the next couple of slides, so hopefully I'll make more sense for everybody here. And last but not least is we do recommend some kind of credit and rebate program and to incentivize and reduce the impact on the stormwater system. So we'll talk a little bit about that and what that looks like later on in this presentation as well. So when we talk about fee groupings, again, detached home equals to 1. So this is our baseline. So there's 1 unit. Now, if you look at semi-detached, factor is 0.7. So you may say, well, it's duplexes, but the area is about 0.7 ratio against 1.0 against the detached home unit. So then if you look at even the triplex and the pentaplex, the unit is now 0.5, and then now condominium is also 0.5, house is 0.5. But as you increase in density, you notice that the ratio starts decreasing to 0.4 per unit. So the more dense you are, the less ratio per unit that you'd be charging relative to the 1 detached residential unit. So these are different product categories. And again, of course, the commercial properties themselves are measured. So then that will be factored in when we do our fee calculations. So what does that actually mean when we talk about dollars? Well, when we start looking at dollars, you'll see this table here. This table really is just for illustrative purposes only. Like I mentioned earlier, the actual rate is going to be approved as part of the 2020 budget process. But we felt it was important to include this slide in here just so we can get an understanding and contextualize how the fee and how the charges work. So for a detached residential unit, the existing property tax contributions is about 174. Now, if we move towards impervious area unit, impervious area charge fee process, then we're looking at billing unit value of about 1. And that translates to about annual stormwater fee of about $129. So it's a slight decrease of $45. Now you can look at the duplexes. Previously existing property tax contributions 165, but you'll notice here that the ratio is 0.7 of the detached residential unit. But keep in mind, there's 2 units within that building type or that property type. So it's 0.7 times 129 times 2 gives you 181, and then so on and so forth for the condo, townhomes, and the apartments. As you can see, for the apartment, you'll see that there's a 40 here. That 40 there is just an example. It really depends what that property, how many units they have. But again, the math is the same. The way we calculate is the same. Is 0.4 times 40 times the baseline of 129 to get your ratio. Now, the main thing is the commercial property owners. You'll see here the ICI. Now, this last row is not any particular property or commercial property. It's really just an average of all the commercial properties we have in Barrie. It's just to, again, illustrate what it may look like. So currently on average, a commercial property may contribute 1,138. But if we measure their impervious areas, their impervious area is actually equivalent to 16.4 of the detached residential units. Therefore, 16.4 times 129 gets you to 2,115, and there will be an increase on their stormwater fees. Now, again, as you can see, there's downs and ups because we are, again, looking at that pie chart earlier where it's a shifting of the commercial towards the residential, mainly because we're looking at impervious areas and the contributors to the stormwater. All right. So I'll jump now to the credit program. So the credit program is something that we also have looked at because based on feedback, it is something that is important to the public. So we did speak to a variety of municipalities that do have stormwater fee and also have a credit program. And based on discussion with them and discussion within a team, we came to the same conclusion the other municipalities have come to as well. Mainly one, non-residential properties are typically larger and have more impervious areas, so the construction of the stormwater facilities will have a more significant impact on the city's stormwater system and the natural receiving environments. Essentially, what we're saying is more bang for your buck when we talk about stormwater facilities on those large commercial properties that have impervious areas. From a residential fee perspective, they're oftentimes too small to economically justify the construction of the on-site stormwater features that would qualify for credit. In other words, insufficient payback. Now, we started looking at a different perspective from within the city of Barrie itself. From an enforcement and administration perspective, due to the number of residential properties and the sheer number of residential properties we have in the city of Barrie, it becomes cost prohibitive when we start looking at enforcement and administration for credit programs. Now, if we look at non-residential properties, yes, there is quite a few, but at the same time, they are fewer properties. Therefore, they are more manageable in terms of the enforcement and administration of the credit program. So that's the rationale that we came up with in discussing with our municipalities, as well as with internally within our own team. And in discussing with the other municipalities, this is really what they've come up with in terms of their non-residential property credit programs. What they always have is some kind of maximum cumulative credit. So this is a cap of about 30 to 50%. And within this 30 to 50%, there are 4 different categories that you could do to earn those credits. So the first category is a runoff volume reduction. Second one is a peak flow reduction. Third is water quality treatments, and education and operation is the fourth. Now you've been asking, well, why is there such a big range between each of these different categories? So 15 to 40, 15 to 40, 10 to 30, and 5 to 15. Now the reason for that is every municipality has different focuses and different things that they want to encourage the property owners to do. Therefore, they may put more weight on, let's say, runoff volume reduction. So if a facility has something, well, if a property owner did something to reduce the runoff volume, then they may earn, let's say, 35 to 40. But water quality treatment for that municipality isn't as important. Therefore, for any facility that does water quality treatment on that property, may get 10, 15, or 20 only. But again, through all 4 of these different categories, really, they all add up to a max of 30 to 50%. So you can't exceed this cap, even though you're doing all these different categories and stormwater features. All right, so in terms of the next steps for this project team, we're hoping to bring this presentation and staff report to the general committee for their review and approval, and then hopefully to council for final approval of the staff report and the presentation. And if everything is approved, we're looking to move right away on the hiring and training of the recommended project resources, the 2 that we talked about at the beginning of the staff report. The reason for that is we think it's best that we do have some kind of overlap between the implementation to the launch of the fee to final sustainment. Simply because there will be knowledge transfers and they'll get a better understanding how the program came to inception and be able to help better support the public. So that's kind of how we've planned out the project if approved. In addition to that, the project team will be working on the development of a master billing file and the business processes that will be in support of that. So these business processes, everything outside of the system, and could be cross-departmental as well. And then engage with our financial system vendors to complete the necessary system changes. So this is where we're taking the master billing file, feeding it into the financial system to be able to have the bill be sent out via the water and wastewater bills. And there's some system changes required for that. And of course, finally, to finalize the rates in preparation for the 2023 budget approval process, like I mentioned earlier in the staff report recommendations. And that's it for me, actually. So if there are any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them best of my ability right now.
Great, thank you, Evan. Actually, before we get into a discussion and questions of clarity, we're going to move up this agenda item 6.2, report to Finance and Corporate Services Committee dated January 25th, 2022. Staff report on Stormwater Climate Action Fund. So committee and members of council present can ask questions concerning the presentation and also the staff report. Can a member of committee put the motion on the floor? Councillor Thompson? And does anybody have any questions for the presenter or staff in relation to this? Oh, actually, Ms. Cook just put her camera on for a sec. Not sure if she wanted to.
No, it was operator error, sorry.
Okay, no worries. Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thank you, Chairman Harvey. Just had a couple of questions of clarification. I'm curious whether, there's all kinds of ICI different forms. For example, a downtown, let's say a 2 or 3 story building downtown, which takes up basically 100% of the lot, and a standalone grocery store on Yonge Street or Bayfield Street or something. Are they going to, I'm just curious, if we know, like, for example, a downtown business, how much would they be paying? Because they might have residential in the commercial. Is it only because it's what it's zoned as? It doesn't matter what the actual use is, or how does that work, first of all?
Thanks, Deputy Mayor Ward. I think I'm going to pass over to Nancy. She might be able to help clarify on how we actually delineate those types of properties and help clarify that question for you.
Okay. Hi, yes. Usually you build based on land use, so not zoning, what is actually being used. And if there is a mix of commercial and residential, then it typically gets charged at the commercial rate where we actually measure it. Now, if it is a multi-story building downtown, then it may not see a significant increase, because if it's a tall building that has a large assessed value, they would have been paying quite a bit for stormwater under property taxes. And if it's a compact, so if it's tall but relatively compact and it doesn't have a large surface area, they may not see a significant increase. The properties that tend to see, commercial properties that tend to see a significant increase are those ones that maybe don't have a large assessed value. They have large sprawling surface parking lots, maybe some stores on the edge of town. Those are the ones that would more likely see an increase rather than something tall and skinny downtown.
Okay, thanks. And sort of related to that is, they gave an example of an average of 2,000 or something in the commercial. What would they be paying under this, a large grocery store, standalone grocery store? I mean, is it tens of thousands, thousands? Like, I just have no idea what kind of figure, what kind of bill they're going to be looking at.
Yeah, I don't have them off the top of my head. I would have to, but we do take a look at individual properties, and ways of seeing it. So sometimes you look at specific properties because they are, a large Walmart with a large surface parking lot. Their bill tends to be more in tens of thousands. Whereas, but then so there's some properties that an individual property doesn't get charged more, but there might be a property owner that owns multiple properties. They have a chain. So sometimes you need to look at it from a property owner perspective, because one individual property won't have a huge bill, but if you add up all the properties they own, they might see it. So we can look at it 2 ways. But yeah, typically you're not talking about hundreds of thousands, but we do tend to see properties that are 10,000 plus, the larger ones.
Okay, and I'm not sure if you can answer this, but would it automatically, if a commercial tenant in one of those multi-unit buildings had a lease that said they pay taxes, would this automatically be included as well, or would that have to determine whatever their lease said?
Yeah, it would.
Mr. Miller might want to answer. I don't know. He's put on this.
Yeah, it would have to depend on what their lease said, and it would be up to each property owner how they distribute the costs amongst.
I guess my question then for Mr. Miller, is this a tax? Would they be considered a tax for their purposes or not?
No, this would be considered. No, it would not be considered tax, and that's why we do measured impervious area, and it's been taken to court in other jurisdictions, not in Canada but more in the States, and if people have said, oh, this is just a tax in another form, and it's always come out when you do it based on impervious area, it's always come out and said no, it's a user fee, it's not a tax.
Yeah, and I'll just jump on Deputy Mayor Ward as well. It's important to remember this will be billed through the wastewater bill. So it would
Okay.
be shifted off their property tax. So depending on what their lease says on how they handle, like the property tax reduction or would flow if there is one. And then it would be an allocation of how they're doing the water and wastewater in the building.
So like just to tag on the Craig, yeah, they're going to be using the water wastewater billing, and really would be, like Nancy mentioned, would be looking at the property owners, and depending on what the agreement is, that's between the property owner and the lease agreements.
Okay, that's it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Mayor Lehman, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Evan and Nancy, for the presentation and all the work to get to this point. It's, you know, the sort of the more you drain, the more the pain kind of model. It's, you know, we've often talked about shifting city services where possible to a user rate model that reflects how much of the service you use, and this is a way of doing that. Although it's a little different than a utility or you know, landfill pay as you throw and those sorts of things. I guess my first question is sort of a technical one. The second question is about the rollout to our community. So the technical question was, and I'm sorry, I maybe missed this, Evan, in the presentation. When you're calculating impervious area, is it always as a percentage of the property area for the non-res, or is it actually an absolute amount?
I'll answer it, but Nancy, you can feel free to jump on that as well. But it's my understanding is that commercial properties is absolute amount, so we're actually measuring those impervious areas. So it's not going to be the ratio for.
And that will be for all non-residential properties. You're going to measure the absolute amount of and so it's literally more like a rate in the sense that you're applying some sort of factor that says for every square meter of impervious surface, you generate X volume of stormwater, and the value of that is Y, and there's your bill.
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfectly, that's right.
And with the residential, I'm assuming, I've forgotten who did it this way, Kitchener or somebody actually attempted to map the impervious surface for residential, which I can only imagine was a very time-consuming, difficult, and probably ultimately not very valuable exercise. But it would have added, I guess, a degree of perceived fairness, because it's a slightly more pure pay-as-you-go model to say that the person who has already made an effort, or you know, whose property functions in such a way that they only have the roof as impervious, the driveway is made impervious, whatever it is, you know, presumably they would pay a little bit less than somebody who's paved 50% of their yard. And again, I'm sorry if I missed your comment on this, but I'm assuming you didn't try and go to that level of detail because either the aerial photography isn't high enough resolution, there's some technical reason, or was it just workload?
So thanks, Mayor Lehman. So at the end of the day, really, it's a delicate balance between administration and actually running this program and being accurate at the same time. So you're absolutely right. Like if we start looking at measuring specific, yes, we'll get lots of accuracy, but the administration of that, trying to manage that many properties that's constantly changing, potentially changing the way they pave the driveways, things like that, that could potentially have a difficulty in terms of administration and enforcement and calculations. So yes, I mean, part of the answer is workload. The part of the answer is just from a statistical perspective. I mean, it's probably better to have those average areas to be able to calculate those fees, be easier. And Nancy, I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Yes, so I think, I have to make an exact number, but I think by number of properties, 82%, I think, if I'm not correct, of Barrie's properties are residential. So when you reduce measuring individual residential properties, you take all of a sudden 82%. So you're actually only measuring 18% properties, and those are the ones that have higher impervious area. So you're getting more bang for your, way more bang for your buck. And if you throw on residential, that's a huge additional workload. The one thing though, we do a check, and what we did was we did statistical sampling of a variety of residential properties across all areas of the city of Barrie. And we took a look at, we did analysis, statistical analysis, said, okay, what are the largest homes? What are the smallest homes? 75th percentile, median, all that. And if there was a significant range, between sizes of single family, or I should say detached residential units, we would have maybe recommended going that route of having different tiers, and Mississauga did go that route. But what
Yeah, so I see, yeah.
there wasn't a significant range from the biggest homes to the smallest homes, are not significant enough to justify going to that level. And when you're looking at residential properties paying $10 a month, you might, if you broke it up the tiers, it might be you'd have 3 tiers, one that pays $9, one that pays 10, and one that pays 11. And so, you make that judgment call.
Yeah, fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. And then the second question I had, Mr. Chair, is about the sort of communicating it to the community. You listed a number of other municipalities that have done this. I mean, we're not the first, but it's kind of a new idea for people. And anytime you pull something out on the onto a separate line or a separate bill, people tend to notice it. This is something Deputy Mayor Ward and I learned the hard way when the city's water and electricity bills were separated into 2 separate bills. People didn't pay that much attention to the 30 or 40 bucks a month when it was a line on a larger bill that was a couple $100, but pull it out, it gets more attention. Guessing people might have the same reaction to this. They don't really think about $174 of their property tax bill went to stormwater. They're just going to get a new bill and say, what's this? So how do we successfully communicate that? Are there communities, did you as part of your work look at what other communities had done to try and communicate how this works and sort of build public understanding of it? Is there a city you would point to say they did that well?
I can answer the first part of your question in terms of what other municipalities have done. And really that comes down to what we talked to is that program coordinator position that we talked a little bit about. So really that person becomes the face of the program and to really help with the education and outreach of the program once it is launched. And that's why a lot of these municipalities, I think Mississauga did it and Guelph did it as well, but they didn't really hire that position until after the fee has gone live, which is where we're coming in saying, hey, we really do want to have this program coordinator be part of the implementation process. So they get an understanding how the program is going to be built. And again, like you said, be able to do the education and outreach out to the public to be able to get them a better understanding of it. And of course, the project team is still going to be doing a lot of communication plan throughout this year and also have a communication plan post-launch as well. In terms of how well it worked, maybe Nancy, based on the experience with other municipalities, what have you seen that's based on what they've done and see what worked for them? But I think it really depends. Like it really depends on which municipality and the demographic that they have.
Yes, thank you, Chair and Mayor. Yes, so the 2 municipalities I think have done a really good job fairly recently with implementations, I would say, is the City of Guelph and City of Victoria. And luckily we've already done some public education work as part of this consultation for this rate. And I've been pleasantly surprised how many comments we got back talking about the need to protect Lake Simcoe and the need to change how we view stormwater management. So I think that's what we need to build on. And when, if and when this rate does get introduced, to remind everyone why this is being done and the need to protect the water resources. There's already some great momentum in the city of Barrie, and I think it's a matter of building of that. And there's certainly a lot of great examples out there that we can use, one could use for an implementation.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? I've just got a couple. The first one would be, obviously, right now, this type of item is being funded through our wastewater. Would this new program cause wastewater rates to decrease at all?
Thanks, Councilor Harvey. So currently, technically, it's funded by property tax. So currently, the funding model is property tax in terms of the stormwater. Craig, I see you raise your hand, so maybe you want to jump in there real quick as well.
Yeah, just quickly, that is the primary funding source. I think Councilor Harvey remembers there is some small portion of water rates that are helping to fund some stormwater charges. So those water, that element would disappear on the water rate. It is fairly small. It wouldn't be a substantial decrease, but there is some small benefit there.
Okay, great. And I guess when you look at it from a cost benefit piece, I couldn't find anywhere in the staff report where it talked about the funding source for these two new proposed positions. Would they be funded by the money coming in, or is there a different funding source anticipated?
So I'll jump in on that one, Evan. So the ask is right now, if council approves it, there is a stormwater project that has funded the project to date that is quite a bit under budget. The idea is that we would fund the positions when they come online this year directly from that project. Then when the stormwater rate goes live, the permanent funding source would be from the stormwater rate. So basically you would see, if council does approve it, you would see all else being equal, you would, if we approved a $10 million funding source, you would see $10 million shift off the property tax. And then there would be a new budgeting, a new budget section. You'd have a stormwater rate budget and you would have $10 million and so much is going for operating, so much is paying for capital. And those positions would get funded from that source.
Okay, and I assume these two positions then are totally separate and don't intersect at all with the new climate change coordinator that we approved as in this current year's budget?
Through you, Chairman Harvey, it's completely separate. It would be one position would be really for the administration of the billing process. And then the other one is, as Evan referenced, would be more to dealing with, be the face of the program to handle the implementation of the ICI credit program. So it's completely separate from that previous position you mentioned.
Okay, great. And the only reason I struggle with this is the timing, because we have a lot of businesses that are still struggling along. Obviously, this is going to have an impact on the businesses because I only anticipate that it's going to be this added dollar value is only going to be added on to the tenants. I can't imagine the landlords are going to eat it. What if any implications are there if we were to delay this a year to give the businesses another year to rebound? Hopefully we're in a better position when it comes to the pandemic and things of that sort.
So the implication, as Nancy has mentioned, really, it's the education and outreach to the public. We've built up a really good momentum in terms of sharing this information of the stormwater fee to the public and why it's needed and why we have it set up that way. If we delay it out a year, we would lose that momentum, but at the same time, like you said, it would provide that reprieve for the property, for the business property owners. So that's the main thing I would say. And Craig?
Yeah, I was just going to add on there. We'd probably, the longer we defer it out, we'd probably, if council chooses to go that way, we would have to probably reevaluate the measuring of the properties and some of the work that we've done. Probably wouldn't say it's throwaway, but there would need to be another exercise done just to make sure that we've captured the most up-to-date average sizes and that sort of thing.
Through to you, Chair Harvey. I would also maybe add that by number, more properties will actually see a decrease than an increase. So you definitely would give a reprieve to the large paved areas, but there's some properties that would see a decrease and would delay the reprieve that they would see from actually implementing the fee.
Great, thank you.
It's revenue neutral. Yeah, this is revenue neutral, so it's a net sum game. Yeah.
Okay, great. Any further discussion from any members of council? I don't see that any other members are on other than committee members. Any further discussion? Mayor Lehman.
Yeah, if we're moving up the item and we're currently in discussion around it, I guess just the general comment I'd make around time. I think one of the strengths of the more you drain, the more the pain model is that a lot of the businesses that would be affected, to be frank, are those that have profited from the pandemic. A lot of the big box stores and the grocery stores are going to be the hardest hit. So I struggle to worry about the impact on them financially. I do think the issue around, major manufacturers and sorry, and I would say the same thing about warehouses. I mean, probably the biggest stormwater bills in the city that don't go to shopping malls or big box stores are going to go to warehouses. I mean, if we're sort of judging the economic impact, I would argue that those that have done the best during the pandemic happen to be the ones that this kind of system would likely charge the most to. Now, that's not a reason to do it, but I guess I'm making the argument it's not a reason to not do it because I think you are going to have, for example, some manufacturers out there who have a lot of impervious surface because they've got a big yard, they've got a big fleet, they've got big storage areas that are impervious. There, I'd have a bit of concern around us affecting our competitiveness as a location. But sorry, got some kids in the background here. You can probably hear them. But I do think the smaller commercial properties, the ones that we often worry about with the pandemic, the restaurants, the gyms, the individual businesses downtown, places like in small plazas. I can't see it ending up being a major burden. I guess it would be good for council to see some more math on that. But we got a bit of time because the implementation's 2023. And boy, if we're still in the same cycle of pandemic closures at this time in 2023, I imagine council may want to make a different decision just overall. But I would keep going for now because I'm less concerned that the types of businesses affected by this are those that have been heavily impacted by the pandemic. And I do think, the public support for this actually was a bit of a pleasant surprise to me. I mean, nobody in the public is going to be unhappy about their residential tax bill going down by $45. So no surprise if you own a home that you're going to like this. It's a tax reduction in exchange for a new rate that is lower than the net. So I guess those would be my comments, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to support the motion that's on the floor. I think I think many progressive municipalities have taken this step. And what's unusual for Barrie is we have a lake that all levels of government we get the only lake in the province that has its own piece of legislation because all levels of government care so much about it. And the federal, provincial, and local governments have all made such an effort. And I see this as part of our future ways of making the lake even cleaner and protecting it even more. I'll leave it there.
Any further discussion around Mayor Lehman's comments? Councillor Thompson.
Actually, Mayor Lehman made a very good point. I was thinking the same thing, that the biggest emitters are the big box stores that have done very well. Maybe I'm not under, so maybe a point of clarity on it. If we reduce it from the property tax and then it ends up on the wastewater, a new line, would that affect the renter of a home where the benefit of the landlord is going to, so then the new bill is going to end up on the wastewater where a tenant wouldn't have an opportunity to, change the driveway or that's the one question. And then another one was, will our planning policies reflect trying to reduce surfaces? Like if a factory that doesn't need a large parking lot, but needs a large building, there's, planning policies that states that they have to have a certain amount of parking spots and all that. Would we change those policies to encourage, or these are two separate issues? Planning would have to do that, and this is a totally separate thing.
Through the chair to Councillor Thompson, I can try to answer that first question. Really, the idea of the water wastewater billing is, again, just to build the property owners. So we would be able to, the idea would be to delineate that between the owners versus the tenants. So that water bill will be going to the owners instead. And depending on how the owner wants to spread that out with their tenant, that's between them and their tenants and the lease agreements that they have. In terms of the second question that you have, I think you're right. It is more of a planning question. It is out of scope for this project at this point. We're really looking at purely just for impervious areas. How do we make sure that this is built fairly, and how do we get that information out there to the public? The planning side of things and the policy side of things, that I will have to leave to the building and planning team.
Evan, maybe I can jump in here. It's Jacob Reed, Supervisor of Technical and Stormwater Operations.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Reed.
Thank you. So just to maybe answer a bit of it more from an operational perspective, when I look at the benefits of the funding model, when we look at commercial properties, the stress put on the public system from those properties is quite a lot, and the water's quite flashy when we have a storm event. And in the current model, there's no way to fund for the operations and maintenance impacts from that. And by creating the credit program, it actually encourages those commercial properties to implement greener solutions on their own property, which then benefits our public system. And to Nancy and Evan's points about it being a little bit more fair to the whole system, I think that then everyone sort of sees the benefit in it. And so a lot of the big box stores who already have stormwater management facilities on their properties would just be encouraged to be good stewards with their stormwater management. And by adding, be applying for a credit program to reduce their rates by doing something positive on their site, it's a win-win for everyone. So I just thought I'd add that in there.
Great, thank you. Go ahead, Nancy.
Thank you. And to build up on what Jacob was saying, one of the biggest benefits to a credit or rebate program that other municipalities have found is that in order to apply for credit, is not only does a property have to show that they have this on their property, but they have to show it's being maintained and it's working. And some municipalities say that is the single biggest benefit of introducing a rate with a credit program, is that all of a sudden, all these systems that were designed, so these properties that have had to design with green infrastructure standards and low impact design standards that the city of Barrie is starting to introduce, is that now the city has a way of making sure that these measures perform on an ongoing basis.
Great, thank you. I did see Mr. Miller's camera on earlier. I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything further to this, Mr. Miller?
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. I think Jacob and Nancy's point is very important. I know we focus a lot on the rate here and shifting it. It really is to also change behaviors, as Nancy's pointing out, and the biggest contributors, making sure that there's an incentive for them to reduce runoff where they can, and ultimately it's to save the lake. So I would big benefit to moving to this type of model. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anything further, Councillor Thompson? Oh, okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor Ward.
Thanks. Just sorry, one more question. Do we know for all the comparable, is everybody billed through their water bills? Is that the standard in Ontario? Or is there a variety of billing methods?
Through the chair to Deputy Mayor Ward. So it's a bit of a mix. So really some municipalities, they bill via their property taxes, but then they find out that they really should be billing via their water bills, simply because they run into issues with properties that are tax deductible, so to speak, or that they're not necessarily having to pay the property tax. But at the same time, they need to be billed for this fee, right? So they start shifting away from the property tax and more towards the water billing side of things. The other side of it too is City of Barrie is a little bit different than some of the municipalities, is that some of the municipalities actually have the utility companies do the billing for them. So that's why we start talking about that financial billing analyst position, because those municipalities, they don't need that position because they're not the ones doing the billing. But City of Barrie is unique that we're the ones that's doing the billing. So we do need to have that resource. And again, it's very different. So we're building it to unique to what we need for the city.
Okay, thanks. I think it said in the report, schools are the only ones that would be exempt from this.
That's correct. Based on the Education Act, that we have to exempt it. Everybody else, it's property tax exempt. I mean, really, at the end of the day, you can think of it like we said, it's a user fee. The more you pay, right? So you could look at it that way.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Any further comments? No. I will support it in principle, but I still struggle with some components of this. And these are from real life stories where I've spoken to small business owners in my own ward. Just had someone reach out to me just prior to Christmas, actually. A new landlord had purchased several blocks of buildings along Brine Drive, and now that their lease was coming up for renewal, their renewal was almost triple what they were paying. And that was causing them enough of a strain. So I have some concern that people in that situation, outside of the big box stores, there's no concern with the big box stores, because when everybody else was affected by these restrictions and closures, the big box stores were still basically able to continue on as if nothing was going on. And also too, someone else that I've spoken to that's in one of our malls that has two different businesses in the same mall that are personal service related. And even right now they're at 50%. And I mean, when you've got businesses like that are just hanging on, that's the piece that causes me concern with the timing. But I will support it in principle. But I would appreciate, I don't know if it's possible or not, Mr. Miller, to get a little bit more clarity on the type of dollar value that we would anticipate being associated to some of these small businesses, because I think that's probably our bigger concern, is how is this going to impact small business opposed to the big box stores. But with that, I will call the question. All those in favor? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. And then we will move on to our second presentation, which is concerning transit service guidelines. I would like to now call upon Mike McConnell, Transit Project Lead, and Dennis Carr of Dillon Consulting Limited to provide the presentation concerning the transit service guidelines.
Okay, hello everyone. Hello, Chair Harvey. As you were mentioning, we have a presentation on the conventional service guidelines. So with that, I will share my screen now. If you could let me know when it appears.
Yeah, you're good. We can see it.
Okay, great. So for today's presentation, we'll be providing an update on Barrie's Transit Vision project and summarizing the recommended transit service guidelines. So I'm Mike McConnell, Barrie Transit's project lead on the Vision project, and Dennis Carr is the project lead or the project's advisory consultant. And we'll be speaking to you about the service guidelines he will be speaking to you as the subject matter expert in terms of the service guidelines. So just jumping right in with our project update, staff have initiated a transit network review for this project, which is referred to as Barrie's Transit Vision. Barrie's Transit Vision will assess the current and the future planning conditions to create a future transit network that meets today's riders, in addition to preparing for the growth we're seeing in the city of Barrie over the next decade. The recommended transit network will be implemented in line with the Allendale Mobility Hub occupation, with consideration for a growing Barrie towards the ultimate project horizon of 2031. The project will also consider impactful variables such as a growing Barrie in the new Hewitts and Salem secondary areas, the transportation master plan recommendations, new transit service types, and new intensification areas through the new official plan. Since the last council update in January of 2021, staff have conducted the first public engagement to gather feedback on the current transit network, to gather feedback on the project principles we brought forward, and to ask residents really how they would like their transit network to grow. We received some pretty valuable feedback with a strong mandate for this project scope, with 90% of the respondents desiring a new network with quick and frequent routes. Following the engagement, staff procured an advisory consultant, Dillon Consulting, as part of our technical working group. Dennis, working as a partner with Dillon Consultant, provides a wealth of experience from multiple transit network review projects throughout Canada. And then in the mid 2021, staff, or mid-2021, staff conducted a comprehensive assessment of existing ridership trends, significant land uses, socioeconomic and demographic data, such as income levels in carless households, and future growth, population and employment growth projections to create a network design that meets today's needs and tomorrow's riders' needs to proactively plan for the future. So this brings us to winter 2022, where we'll be bringing forth recommended service guidelines. These guidelines are a valuable process as they bring clarity, consistency, accountability, and equity to transit service decisions. For the project next steps, we'll be further engaging with the public to gather feedback on our proposed transit direction and bring forth a staff report to council with the preferred network based upon the public feedback. So at this point of the presentation, Dennis will provide a brief summary of the recommended service guidelines.
Okay, thank you very much, Mike. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me okay. Look at Mike and see if he nods.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So I always like to start these presentations by giving a quick definition of why do we have transit service guidelines and why they're important. As Mike mentioned, transit service guidelines bring that clarity, consistency to the process of planning and adjusting transit services to meet changing rider needs. And it does this by providing clear expectations in an accountable, transparent, equitable, and efficient manner. They also provide a tool to implement and monitor the council-endorsed project principles for Barrie Transit's vision. So we're at that critical stage of the project right now where these guidelines provide that framework for moving forward. Next slide, please. The guidelines were sourced from a variety of best practices from a number of peer agencies, as I have listed here, and were assessed using a lens of project principles identified through the community engagement process. This helps to provide a balance between best practices and local context and priorities when developing the guidelines. The document itself is split into guidelines that are specific to a proposed route hierarchy, as well as system-wide targets and service design standards that influence the introduction, coverage, and frequency of service. They cover both customer aspects of the service as well as service productivity and effectiveness. Now, the hierarchy of routes and services identified in the guideline document provide a direction to how routes and services are planned. It recognizes that different types of routes have different purposes and identifies key design principles to help achieve these purposes. For example, express routes are designed to provide quick and direct cross-city trips with a focus on ridership growth. The frequent transit network provides a similar function, operating a minimum of 15-minute peak frequency to attract ridership growth. On the other end of the spectrum, we also have a local transit network, which is focused on connecting residents to the local community and to the express and frequent transit network for longer distance trips. And finally, we have transit on-demand zones, which provide demand responsive service in areas or times when the land use or the demand make it difficult to operate a local route, and the on-demand service can provide a good level of service for your customers. Design guidelines and key performance measures identified in this document will help achieve the intended purpose of each route and service identified in the hierarchy. For example, stop spacing guidelines are closer on local transit routes since their objective is to increase coverage, and further apart on frequent transit network routes since their objective is to reduce travel time. Other guidelines that are noted for each route typology include minimum span of service and frequency, as well as key performance indicators that measure things like crowding on buses and service productivity. Finally, we have network guidelines that are focused on system-wide decisions that influence the introduction of service and changes to service levels. These include service coverage targets for the entire city, triggers to consider frequency changes, as well as the introduction of transit in developing areas, which all balance productivity, ridership growth, and equity. So to conclude, the request today is to endorse the transit service guidelines. Having these council-approved transit service guidelines is a common practice among many transit systems. Doing this early in the Barrie Transit Vision process will help create buy-in as recommended network modifications will be based on the design guidelines identified in this document. It also increases the transparency and equity in decision-making, including monitoring services based on established key performance indicators and identifying key actions to be taken based on established triggers, all of which align with Barrie Transit vision. I want to thank you for your time today, and we'll open it up if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you both for the presentation. And before we get into questions and discussions, we'll also move up agenda item 6.3, report to Finance and Corporate Services Committee dated January 25th, 2022. Staff report on the transit service guidelines. So committee and members of council can ask questions concerning both the presentation and the staff report. Can I have a member of the committee put it on the floor, please? Deputy Mayor Ward. And does anybody from committee have any questions in relation to the report? Actually, the only one question that I have then, where do we see things like transit on demand going in the future? Is that potentially something that we could see a significant expansion on?
That's something that we certainly are exploring, our on-demand service type and how we can best implement this new service type in terms of its best operations in low demand areas and times to make the most efficient service possible to allocate resources where they need to be.
Great, thank you. Actually, I just saw Mr. Forsyth unmute. Did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, sure. I was just basically going to say what Mike said too. Thanks for the question, Councillor Harvey. We do back in 2018 when we looked at moving the hub to Allendale. We didn't have the transit on demand model, and we were looking at how are we going to adjust our routes, and knowing the growth in the south end of the city. I know obviously there was discussion at council this past year in terms of transit on demand servicing some of those areas as they're built out. So not only in some of those growth areas, but even some of those existing areas we're looking at and investigating in the city where there is no service today. And some of that is, lack of infrastructure, being able to support, say, a full-size bus and being able to get in there with a conventional bus, or even just some of those other areas where the demand may be quite low, but there still may be a need. The transit on demand is going to allow us to do, provide that service kind of in a flexible way, in an affordable way, and spread it out to try to, increase coverage even that much more throughout the city. So great. All that being said, it's definitely, I think, without spoiling it, once we, assuming we get, some support here from council with the guidelines and stuff, when we come back with a network design in a couple months, I think you're going to see a lot more transit on demand in that system than you probably will see today. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Sounds like there's some secrets in that bag then. Mayor Lehman, go ahead.
Thanks for that. Yeah, I did have a couple of questions on this. And so thanks very much for this. I mean, in taking a look at the guidelines that are in the, particularly the appendixes of the staff report, it's interesting to see where people's sort of primary concerns or interest were, and frequency, interestingly, comes high on the list, especially I imagine at this time of year. Can you just review for me where we are? So if we wind the clock back pre-COVID, if I'm not mistaken, we had record ridership in 2019, in part because of the partnership with Georgian College. On the strength of ridership growth in 18 and 19, we added the 100 buses, particularly in that super high ridership triangle of downtown to Georgian to RVH and Bayfield. I guess the question I have is, we had a service standard at that point at the height of our ridership. How do these guidelines compare to that service standard? Are we increasing frequency, keeping frequency the same, dropping it? Maybe you can just give me the quick side-by-side to say how this differs from where we were pre-COVID.
Yeah, certainly. So we historically used a set of guidelines which indicated bus stop spacing. It indicated just general route design metrics, like try and avoid deviations for wherever possible for your quick and frequent routes. This kind of what we're bringing forward now is a much more comprehensive list of service guidelines. So new items would be the new identifying service guidelines by service type, or another example would be new service area implementation guidelines would be another kind of new guideline being bring forward. So I guess in summary, this is building off of what we've historically used in just a much more comprehensive and detailed method.
Yeah, for sure, and I can see that in the work. I guess what I was trying to understand, I wasn't able to quite decipher it from the report. Is if I looked at the service we were providing to the public pre-COVID, we had our sort of limited express kind of version, which I thought was tremendous, actually. And then we had Route 8 as a sort of a backbone, and Route 1. And then you had a number of other local services, but there was a frequency established to some of our key corridors that actually resulted in part from having multiple routes. So if I'm at Yonge and Minette's Point, for argument's sake, or somewhere along the Yonge Street corridor in the southeast, and I need to go to the north end of the Bayfield corridor, I probably had like 3 route options. And to some extent, I probably had I had multiple buses coming by the same stop, and that created a frequency for common trips that would have exceeded probably what's in some of the standards here. So I guess what I'm trying to understand is, if you implemented these standards across our system, would we be generally increasing frequency, keeping it the same, decreasing it? I mean, that comes with more buses, more drivers, more service hours, all those sorts of contract implications. But for council to endorse the guidelines, I guess I'm just trying to get a sense of how these compare to the service we were providing previously.
So through the chair, Harvey, to Mayor Lehman, to that, I would say that we're not, through these guidelines, we're not proposing any new service enhancements or any new service hours. Okay. If that answers your question.
It gives me a part answer. I guess, would we be seeing greater frequency on these, on the frequent transit? Now, I mean, the standards show that we're going to have a bus every 15 minutes in the peak, 30 minutes in the weekday off peak. Maybe it's an unfair question because you don't know what the network's going to look like yet. But I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what council's being asked to endorse here by way. I certainly see the value in terms of differentiating the type of service. I mean, when we started with the old system, as Brent will remember, there was one type of service, a 40-foot bus that trundled around a route in a sort of flower petal pattern to a downtown terminal, and the frequency was a huge problem because frequency was very poor. We increased that frequency by investing substantially in the system and growing the fleet and growing the service hours. So I guess if the purpose of these guidelines is to say we're picking up where we left off because you're not increasing service hours, you're not decreasing, right? This isn't implementing these guidelines wouldn't decrease. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So I think the answer I'm hearing is this is sort of a new way of looking and planning, looking at it and planning our system. I get that. Our customers are going to notice not much change in terms of frequency or the coverage area of the service in the city. That we're going to accomplish through other decisions later. What we're doing here is sort of standardizing our approach to planning. Am I understanding that correctly?
Chair Harvey, yes. This is a standardization approach to standardizing based on our service types, what the rider can expect. Questions relating to specific frequencies on specific corridors would be through the Barrie's Transit Vision project once we go forward with the public engagement on our future network at that stage.
Chair Harvey,
Brent Go Forsyth, ahead, Ms. James Reed.
Brent Forsyth would like to jump in, but he doesn't have an ability to put his camera on, so maybe we could just ask him to to jump in.
Sure, go ahead, Mr. Forsyth.
Okay, thanks, Chair Harvey, and yeah, through Mayor Lehman. Yeah, it's a different.
Oh, we can hear you, Brent.
Okay, there we go. There, I think I have video now.
Ah,
sorry
beautiful.
about that. Yeah.
Hey,
Okay. Yeah. Hello. Yes, I mean, it is a little bit of a difficult answer to give right now until we look at the actual network design. You know, the goal is to kind of keep those similar frequencies and in fact improve them on, potentially in some of the core routes and whatnot. And with the use of the transit on demand, we'll actually be able to continue with that coverage in the less populated, or the areas with less demand. So we may actually be able to see, an improved level of frequency, which is what we're trying to work towards through those major corridors, those major destination spots. So like you said, kind of that backbone of Route 8, I mean, you're probably going to see a very similar map to that. It might look like kind of different routes, but I mean, when you look at the way the city's designed and the travel patterns, that kind of figure 8 is hitting all of those big destination points and picking up in the residential areas. And then some of the TOD and other local will feed into those and hopefully drive them. But yeah, there's going to be much more discussion with council, the public, and engagement as we develop the details of those maps.
Yes, I remember from last time, as soon as you start rolling out maps, the engagement level goes through the roof. Last quick question, Mr. Chair. One of the guidelines speaks to the percentage of the city, essentially residential and commercial, I think, areas or industrial areas that are covered, that are within 400 meters of a stop. I think I've got that right. I can look it back up. I thought our old standard was a little higher than that. Didn't we used to shoot for 90 or 95% of the city? Is this because of the annex lands coming on stream and that's not viable for a while?
Sorry, can I answer that, Mr. Chair? Okay, sorry, thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Forsyth.
Thank you. Sorry. Actually, just a little bit of a technicality. The previous standard was 90% of residential only, not residential and employment. And so we actually were taken a little bit back by that. There was probably an intent 10, 15 years ago when it was first created. Most other agencies do combine residential and employment. Specifically industrial, I think was where we were probably gapping on. What I can say is currently we're at 85% now. And we obviously were striving for more when you look at it in that metric, but you are right. It used to be 90%, but it was missing that employment bucket. Or actually, I think it was specifically industrial.
Well, yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, if you blend it, we would have blended down historically anyway. Actually, Mr. Chair, I think that's a good thing that we're including the industrial piece. I'd always like to shoot for greater coverage than that, in the sense of 400 meters is sort of typical walking distance, and you'd love to think we could reach 100% of our industrial employers with transit service. It is sort of one of the ways that when I'm pitching Barrie as a location as compared to somewhere else in Simcoe County, our frequent transit service or our existing transit services is one of those competitive advantages. But I do recognize that it's not always possible. So again, I guess my question around that one was, are we now setting a standard that's lower, higher, or the same as previous? And the answer, like the last one, is actually, Mayor, it's not really apples to oranges anyway, so you can't strictly compare them. But I think what I'm hearing is actually a step forward, because we will now explicitly require our service to be designed to consider that percentage coverage in both industrial and residential, which is good enough for me for tonight. So thanks for the answers to the questions, guys.
Great, thank you. Any other questions from member of committee or any members of council? Well, great. I'll then call the answer on the motion put on the floor as printed. All those in favor? And I'm in favor also. It's passed. And then we will move on. There's no standing items or referred items. So now we're on to section 5, which is advisory committee reports. We have 6 advisory committee reports to be received. Can I have a member of committee put the advisory committee reports on the floor to be received? Mayor Lehman, thank you. Any discussion around any of the advisory reports 5.1 through to 5.6? No. As a result, I'll call the question. All those in favor? And I'm in favor also. It's passed. And then we will move on to, we've already done 6.1, 6, or actually, no, we haven't done 6.1. So now we'll move on to 6.1. And that is the 2021 fourth quarter internal audit status report, 2021 fraud and wrongdoing program activity, 2021 summary of internal audit activity, and 2022 internal audit work plan. Can I have a member of the committee put the motion on the floor as printed? Thank you, Mayor Lehman. Any questions or discussion? Go ahead, Mayor Lehman.
Thanks so much, Mr. Chair. And Ms. McGregor, thank you very much for your report. As always, it makes very interesting reading. I had one question about the 2021 work and one question about the 2022 work plan. The focus, and I should have gone back and pulled out the work plan from last year, but the focus I know was initially on areas where there is risk in cash handling and so forth, good financial control, areas of potential risk for us to handle. I noted you did make a number of recommendations in both the recreation cash handling and the landfill cash handling piece. And then what I really wanted to ask about was, I guess, is the map. So in paragraph 28 of the staff report, you provided the update on the fraud risk assessment. And there's a heat map there, which tells us that you found, the high impact, high likelihood items. There's 7 that you identified, and then you went on in the report to outline them by category. I guess the question I wanted to ask was, I wasn't quite clear, which are the 7 that landed in that sort of northeast quadrant of the risk map that are high likelihood, high impact, and therefore, form the focus of your office's work. I surmised from some of the detail in here, the areas of greater risk. But I guess what I really wanted to ask you while you're in front of the committee tonight is about those identified areas of higher risk, and whether that has changed your sort of thinking or approach, your priorities in terms of the internal audit work that you do.
Ms. McGregor.
Thank you, Chairman Harvey, through you to Mayor Lehman. The risks that were identified when we did the first assessment in 2018 are obviously still very much in place. I mean, these are risks absent any other controls that the city could be faced with. So we're not saying that these are risks that we haven't taken any steps to avoid or mitigate. These are the inherent risks that exist at the city, and the high likelihood, high impact types of risks that existed 3 years ago still exist today. That's very consistent. New risks that we added to our assessment in this update were things that came out of environmental changes, things like COVID that presented during COVID, where work environments have changed, where our own experience as a city and situations that have presented either in our own municipality or in other municipalities have brought forward potential risks. So we wanted to ensure that we were up to date with all of those. But in terms of our planning, I think it's fair to say the highest impact, highest likelihood risks that existed when we originally prepared this 3 years ago are still very much consistent today as we update. We just supplemented with additional risks, which I know sounds bad to have a higher number, but it's actually a good thing, because you can't work to prevent the risks if you're sort of blind to the fact that they're there. Sort of acknowledging them, identifying them, and then ensuring that we do have measures in place to address them. Those are all the steps that we need to make sure that we don't get impacted more significantly by them. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, Mayor Lehman. I'm happy to speak further.
It does. I guess there was one that was on my mind, which is cyber crime. And I did want to ask about that as part of your, it leads to my next question, sort of around the 2022 internal audit work plan. So and I guess I'd be interested in your answer to this question around whether you feel you are able to get at, by which I mean able to complete internal audit work that addresses what you see as the highest risk. So obviously you use that risk assessment to guide your work plan. You've set out 10 things here that will be part of your 2022 work plan. I'm glad to see a number of them. I think there are areas here that have long needed the attention of your office in terms of some of the things that we do or the agreements that we have outside of the organization. But I guess I didn't see cyber on here, and I know it's a complicated relationship between internal auditors and the folks in our the folks in organizations who are tasked with ensuring the defense against cyber crime. But is there a reason that one wasn't particularly on the list? And then I was looking for your more general comment about your priorities for 2022 and how you set them.
Again, through you, Chair Harvey, to Mayor Lehman. It's not in the risk, not because it's not in the list for 2022, not because we don't view it as a high risk. It would be one of those risks in the top right-hand corner of the heat map, if you will. And it's certainly one that's become more prominent through COVID. It's a risk that has increased, not just for Barrie, but frankly, for every public sector or private industry internationally, I would I would say at this point. That said, we have, again, as part of this process, we do document and have discussions about what controls and what measures our city is taking to mitigate risks of cybercrime. And there certainly are measures being taken primarily led for our information technology department. So they have a lot of measures in place and underway that at another point in time, they also bring in third parties to help with the measurement of risks and mitigating risks in that way. So on that basis, internal audit didn't necessarily have something to add to what's already in place by information technology at this point. I know at some point it might make sense to look at the external resources brought in with this special expertise. This is a very specialized area, which, I don't personally hold cybercrime specializations specifically, but we have very good resources in-house that are looking at these risks and also bringing in external parties as necessary to address them.
Okay. So I guess my general comment or general question then was, in terms of these 10 priorities that you have set out, do you feel you're covering most of that red area in the risk map? Do you feel there are unaddressed risks that could require further attention if for example, the number of exercises could be increased if you had more resources?
Through you, Chairman Harvey, to Mayor Lehman, I don't think we could ever address every risk at the city in 1 year's work plan necessarily, but certainly we work to address all of the highest risks on a rolling basis, if you will, sort of over time. We can't commit to addressing every high risk on an annual basis every year. But yes, I'm confident that we are addressing a lot of high risk areas. And again, in preparing the work plan, we consulted with EMT as well on, areas of risk that they see in their specific divisions, portfolios, to gather input, and if not included this year, sort of put into a carry forward list for the work plan for the subsequent year. So I'm confident that this year and in the coming years that we're addressing all of the highest risks. Yes, it's a bit of a loaded question though. If you had more resources, could you do more? I think I can't say that we couldn't, obviously if we had more, but I'm also very sensitive to, doing the most with the budget dollars that are allotted to us. And I do feel like we're able to accomplish a lot of high impact work with our existing resources. But if there was an open wallet and a lot more money available, could we do more? I'm not going to say no that we couldn't. Yes, we could, but that's not what we're asking for, and certainly that's not contemplated in this work plan. This work plan assumes our resources are what was budgeted for.
Of course. Okay, thanks very much for that. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you, Mayor Lehman. Any other members of committee with any questions? Members of council? No? I'd like to thank you for your report. It was, again, another very detailed report that skimmed over all of your activities over the past year and identified some very common sense controls that have been put in place. I know when we've spoken in the past, I know there's been many controls put on things like credit cards, and obviously in this report it seems like things like petty cash have been identified, and even something as simple as fixing a sign at the weigh scale so that way residents can see the dollar value as it's being rung up. Very, very simplistic things that puts another level of reassurance that people are being charged the appropriate amount of money. And obviously, it seems like there's been some controls and monitoring of the procurement policies to make sure that that everything is in line. So I do appreciate your continued work and thank you for the report. And if there's no further questions, I will call the question on the motion on the floor. All those in favor? And I'm in favor also. It passes unanimously. And then we will move on. I guess we're at the end of it now. So it's a motion for adjournment.
I will move to adjourn and compliment you on your efficient chairing, Councillor Harvey. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Lehman.
And stepping in tonight.
I had big shoes to fill. Sergio called me in the middle of the afternoon and told me I was being thrown to the wolves. So I at least I had a couple hours of preparation here today, and I'll be quite honest with you. Miss Cook left me some very good cheat notes to get me through tonight. So thank you for that, Miss Cook. Anyway, I will adjourn the meeting. I don't know if Miss Cook has anything that she wanted to add. I saw her. No? Okay, great. I'll adjourn the meeting. It's 7:31 p.m. and have a great night. I'm actually surprised Councillor Thompson didn't jump at the adjournment because that seems to be his thing.
I'm not unmuting tonight. That's what I'm doing.
Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.